Okay, my name is Faz Shakir. I'm the National Political Director of the ACLU. I want to welcome you to our students training. I'm going to be joined shortly by my colleagues, Ben Weisner and Vera Edelman from our Speech, Privacy, and Technology team. They're going to talk through your First Amendment rights to protest. We've been hearing from our affiliates all across the country, from students, from parents, from teachers. They want to know what are our rights as we're engaging in important civic activism around the country. And so we thought it was very important to bring together two of our most esteemed lawyers and talk through this in detail with you. But before we do that, I just want to take a moment to kind of think about the moment that we're in. If you reflect back on the past year, it's been one of the most difficult, honestly, for many of us. As a civil rights and civil liberties organization, it has been taxing and stressing for us to see so many of the people we care deeply about being impacted and affected in very, very difficult ways. And you look at some of the most vulnerable people in our community, put your feet in their shoes and think about what the messages that they've heard over the past year, that we want to wall you out, we want to detain you, deport you, call you guilty without due process, stop and frisk you, ban you, surveil you, take your land and water and build an oil pipeline through it. If you're trans, tell you which bathroom you can use or can't use. If you're trans, tell you you can't serve in the military. Take away your health care. Tell you if you're a woman, we're going to make your health care decision for you. And oh, by the way, stop you from voting. That's all the messages some of the most vulnerable people in our community have heard over the past year. It's been a difficult time for all of us. But in this moment, it's always darkest before the dawn. And we're seeing a rebirth of civic activism all around the country, and it's been so inspiring. Of course, it started with the Women's March in January 2017. Many of us participated, and then of course women fighting for Planned Parenthood, making sure that organization didn't get defunded. Women again fighting for equality and respect in the Me Too movement. We saw a disability community literally rolling in wheelchairs through the halls of the Capitol fighting for disability rights during the healthcare debate. We saw the movement for Black Lives fighting for smart justice reforms and to reduce mass incarceration around our country. Again, you saw the trans community fight against an unjust military ban. And recently you've seen Dreamers stand up and fight for equality and respect under the law. And now, students rushing to the front of the line, grabbing the mantle and saying, we're leading the movement, grabbing the nation's consciousness, saying, we got something to say. And I mean, you take a moment and reflect about Parkland. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. In Parkland, a community stricken by unspeakable horror, and to turn that into a moment of strategic and thoughtful action to inspire a nation around how we can make public safety a more important priority. We stand in awe of the Parkland community, of students all around the country, and that's quite frankly the reason we're all here tonight, is to hopefully join together to make that movement the best that it can be. Before I turn it over to my colleagues, I want to make sure you know four things. Now's a good time to get your notepad out or start taking some notes, because Ben and Bear are going to come at you shortly. So here's number one. We're going to email you a lot of the materials that you saw. If you registered, you're going to be getting it via email right after this concludes. If you didn't register, I'd urge you to do so now. Number two is we're going to ask you that if you encounter issues in your schools, to let us know. We're only as good as the information that we get. So let us know about issues that you encounter. You can do that through a couple of ways. One, we're going to set up an online forum. You can go to aclu.org/walkout. That reporting form will be everything that you need to get us the information. And then secondly, you can text us at 82623. 82623, text the word walkout, one word, walkout 82623, and we'll get you all the information you need to know. And we want to be part of you. So let us know what issues you encounter. Number three is, as you're organizing in your community, I hope you'll go to peoplepower.org, post your events there. We can help you connect you with so many others in your community. So I hope that you'll use our grassroots mobilizing arm, peoplepower.org, as a hub for some of the activity that you're doing. And then lastly, we at the ACLU have a summer institute for high school students. So if you're a high school student, we have a 1-week training that occurs in DC every year. So if you're interested, we'd love to have you apply. It's at aclu.org/institute, aclu.org/institute. So those are the 4 things I wanted to convey before I turn it over to a couple of my esteemed legal colleagues, Ben Weisner and Vera Edelman. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Faz. And thank everybody for joining us tonight. We're thrilled to be here to have a conversation with you about your First Amendment rights. Let me be clear up front about what we're not here to do. We're not here to tell you how to protest, and we're not even here to tell you whether to protest. You don't need our help with that. We have watched over the last few weeks as students have succeeded where generations of adults before them have failed in fundamentally changing the national political conversation about a very important issue. You've already changed American politics, and this is your moment, not ours. We're here to give you some information and maybe to give you some tools that you can use to make your own decisions about when and how to protest.
And the first piece of useful information is that we're going to be talking about rights that come from the First Amendment. And the First Amendment really applies to what the government can and can't do. So most of what we're talking about today applies to public schools. If you're a student at a private school, the rules may be different. And everything we're talking about today also applies to all speech equally. Even though we're here in the context of the amazing work that you've all been doing with regard to gun control, it's important to remember that everything we're talking about today applies equally to all viewpoints, regardless of the side that a person wants to take on a particular issue.
And we didn't ask you to spend time with us tonight so we could force you to sit through another school-like lesson. But I do think that it's important to know some of our history and to know that all of us who are activists, who are trying to make change, are standing on the shoulders of giants who came before us. And it's good for you to know that many generations of students before you have engaged in activism in order to change the world.
Students who rightly ignored adults who told them that they just don't know how the world works or are too idealistic. Students like you, students like Claudette Colvin, who in 1955, 9 months before Rosa Parks, refused to move to the back of the bus because she wouldn't accept that that's what society was forcing her to do. She was 15 years old at the time, and she did something that no adult had been brave enough to do yet.
And this is a picture of Mary Beth Tinker. That's the 13-year-old girl in the picture who's wearing a black armband. It's possible that you've heard her name before, and that's because the most important Supreme Court decision about the rights of students to speak in school is named after her. It's Tinker versus Des Moines. When she was 13 years old in the 1960s, she decided that she wanted to engage in a protest of the Vietnam War, and she told school officials that she was going to wear a black armband. They told her that if she and other students did that, they would be punished, and she disregarded that threat and wore the black armband and was then suspended. And the lawsuit that she and other students brought against the school to oppose that punishment went all the way up to the Supreme Court and established the precedent that the First Amendment applies also in schools, not just outside of them.
So in choosing to speak out, a 13-year-old literally made Supreme Court law, the law that still applies to you today. And what that law says is that just by walking into the school, you don't lose your rights to free speech. In the words of the Supreme Court, you don't shed your constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate. And that makes a lot of sense, right? The whole point of school is to teach you how to exist in society beyond school, exist in a society where the Constitution protects your rights.
Does that mean that students have the same rights in school that other people have outside of school to speak freely?
Not exactly. Schools do have the power to regulate students during school hours and on school property. So what that means for you with regard to speech is that you can speak out in school as long as you're not disrupting the functioning of the school. And so the key word there is disrupting. And that's a pretty hard word.
It's an interesting word because, again, what's the point of political protest but to disrupt? We want to disrupt the status quo. We're getting together to protest because we want to cause disruption. The key thing is that you're not supposed to be disrupting the functioning of the school, but you very much should be disrupting the way things are in our society. This sometimes comes up in the school context when schools try to impose discipline on students for the political messages that they wear on their clothing. And so, as you know, many of you probably go to schools that have dress codes. Schools can have dress codes as long as they're applied equally to everybody. A school could say to students, you can't wear baseball hats. But they couldn't say to students, you're allowed to wear baseball hats except ACLU hats, or except NRA hats, or except New York Yankees hats if you're in the South. If they have a rule that allows hats, they can't punish you for the content of that clothing. But that doesn't mean that schools don't do it, often in inappropriate circumstances.
That's true. Schools get it wrong a lot. And if you think your school is getting it wrong, we do want to know that. A few years ago, a student in California, a junior who had come out the year before, decided to wear a shirt that said, "Nobody knows I'm a lesbian," which she thought was pretty hilarious because literally everyone knew that she was a lesbian. And she wore it to school, and all of her classmates either told her it was hilarious or just didn't comment at all. The one person who really took issue was her principal, who called her into his office towards the end of the day and said she either had to turn her shirt inside out or go home.
So it doesn't sound like the clothing in that case disrupted the functioning of the school. What was the reason that the principal offered for why she couldn't wear that t-shirt?
He offered a number of pretty crazy reasons. He told her that she couldn't wear a shirt reflecting any political belief or identity. He told her that her shirt was an open invitation to sex. He told her that her shirt might be a reflection of a gang affiliation. He also told her that if she had worn a shirt that said, "I believe in evolution," which we really hope the school believes in and is teaching, that he would have punished her for that as well. So he was definitely misapplying the rule there, and she rightly reached out to the ACLU, and we sued. And the school, though it never admitted that it was wrong, did change its dress code. So that student, like Mary Beth Tinker, changed the rules that applied to her because they were wrong.
So we've been talking about words, which is the most common definition of speech. But sometimes speech and protest involve more than words, but also actions, especially in the context of these school protests that we're talking about. How are the rules different?
Right, and that takes us to walkouts, which we realize is probably why most of you are listening. You're intending to engage in incredibly powerful, inspiring walkouts. And the reality there is that in most places, the law requires you to go to school. So schools can discipline you for missing school, but they can't discipline you differently if you're missing school because of a political reason or to convey a particular political message. So another way to think of that is even if they can punish you for your actions, they can't punish you for your ideas.
So in this context, most schools probably have some rules that punish you for missing class. But if the ordinary rule is that there would be a light punishment, something short of suspension, but in this context, principals or school superintendents are threatening 3 or 5 or 7 day suspensions for students missing, 20 or 60 minutes of class, that sounds like something we should hear about.
That's right. And we've seen that school districts around the country are preemptively saying what they intend to do. They're saying that they will issue blanket suspensions for 3 days for all students who plan to walk out in a district in Texas. In a district in Montana, a similar statement has been said about 1 day suspensions. And whether or not that's actually appropriate at the school will depend on your school and school district's policy. So if you're thinking about missing 1 class or 2, check out the policy on unexcused or unauthorized absences. If you're thinking you might want to stay out for longer to really increase the volume of your message, look at the policy for truancy. But regardless of what you're going to do, also look at the policy for suspension because there might be process that applies. You might get the right to a formal hearing. If your school is threatening to punish you with 10 or more days of suspension across the country, you have the right to a hearing, and that's when a lawyer can get involved. But in a lot of places, you might have that right for shorter suspensions. So definitely take a look at the policy to know what rules apply to you, and also to know if the school is applying them differently or ignoring them altogether when it comes to your protest.
So there are probably some teachers and administrators who are eavesdropping on our conversation with students right now, and some of them are probably thinking, there's a difference between 1 student missing a class or walking out and 300 students walking out at the same time, right? The school might actually have more of a reason to be worried about the second scenario. They might be worried about the safety of the students. There might be other considerations. So I think it's important to recognize that the Constitution has room for common sense. But even in this context where the students have given so much notice in advance, a really severe or draconian punishment for this act of civic engagement we think would be excessive and possibly illegal, and we'd like to hear from you if that kind of punishment is either threatened or imposed on you. We've been talking a lot about rules, We hope that you don't get the impression that we're here to lecture you about following the rules. Sometimes, for good reasons, people decide to break the rules. And in fact, the history of social change in our country involves people getting together to engage in civil disobedience. That means strategically breaking the law in order to bring more attention, to mobilize attention and involvement in a particular issue with the goal of changing unjust laws. And so that has also involved students. I mean, many of you have already or will be studying the civil rights movement, and you've read about students who didn't accept the status quo, who didn't think that it was okay that the law said that they couldn't eat at a particular restaurant. And so instead of following that law, they broke that law. They risked and faced arrest and punishment in order to shine a spotlight on how unjust that was, and they changed society fundamentally for the better. So please, the takeaway here is not us telling you that you have to follow all rules. After all, we represent this guy, Edward Snowden. Sometimes breaking the rules is the best or the only way for you to change a fundamentally unjust situation.
And we've mainly been talking about breaking school rules here, but it's worth noting that if you want to break rules that might get the police involved, there are also consequences you should think about there, and they might be more serious. And it's also important to remember that they might vary by immigration status.
So we've been talking mainly about, again, rights in school. The situation outside of schools is actually quite different, even for students, right?
That's absolutely true. And that's where a lot of the good news is, because schools have far less, they basically have no control over you outside of school. Outside school, you basically enjoy the same rights to protest and speak out as anyone else. So what does that mean for you if you're a student? It means that you're likely to be the most protected if you speak out away from campus, outside of school hours, and you can organize, protest, and advocate all you want the way that anyone else can.
So it used to be that most protests and a lot of speech took place on sidewalks and in parks. But today, in this generation,
they still do today a little bit.
some, but a lot of it takes place on social media. And we hear often from students who are threatened with punishment and discipline by teachers or administrators for things that they post to social media from their own homes, not on school hours, that the schools say will fundamentally disrupt the functioning of the school. So what do you think students should know about social media and their speech rights?
So the safest rule for social media is, again, that if you are posting off campus, outside of school hours, think about it kind of like a Tinker standard. You're most protected if you're tweeting, posting, Snapchatting things that have no possibility of disrupting the school. And schools, similar to the t-shirt conversation, get this wrong a lot. So for example, in the early days of Twitter, a student in Kansas tweeted about how she had just met the governor, and she said that she told him he sucked. And then the governor called her school principal and told the principal that he had to tell that student that she either had to apologize or would get suspended. The student rightly refused to apologize, and actually the governor ended up apologizing to her.
There are probably some parents listening who don't relish the idea of their students telling the governor that she or he sucks, and that might be an appropriate situation for parental discipline, but it certainly is no business of the school. That is a student speaking out on an important political issue of the day in a way that has nothing to do with the smooth functioning of a school environment.
So we've talked a lot at you, and we're really excited to get to your questions. But before we do that, we want to wrap up and make sure you know the rules that apply to you and your schools. So what can't schools do? They can't discipline your speech or your clothing that expresses a view or an opinion unless it disrupts the functioning of the school or violates the neutral dress codes that Ben talked about. And they also can't discipline your ideas even when they can discipline you for your actions. So look out for those harsher punishments that seem to be motivated for political reasons.
And maybe this message should be more directed to the teachers and administrators who may be listening. Just because a school may have the authority to impose a punishment doesn't mean that it actually should do so. We're trying to teach our children not just about history and math and science, but also about citizenship. And what we've seen over the last few weeks for us has been really inspiring acts of citizenship by students. And sometimes discretion is really the best lesson that schools can teach. And not imposing punishments, even if they're available, seems to me to be the wise course here.
And another great lesson that schools can be teaching their students is that it's important to engage with really hard issues rather than silencing or censoring them. So we saw last week in Virginia, a group of students walked out after they disagreed with a school disciplining a teacher, actually, for talking about gun control in class. And the school initially was going to punish those students, but it rightly realized that really it should be talking to those students and hearing about their concerns. And that's what it ended up doing. It called them in for a conversation rather than for punishment.
And some of you no doubt noticed, especially those of you who are focused on college applications, that a number of prominent colleges and universities made very clear on social media and elsewhere that they will not hold it against applicants if they're punished for their participation in these protests. And that was a message to students about the kind of students who they want in their universities, but it was also a message to schools saying that colleges don't think that punishment, or harsh punishment especially in this context, is appropriate or necessary at all.
So now that you know your rights, please go out and use them. Find out the rules that apply to you. Speak up and dress up in class. Protest all you want outside of school, and really just choose what feels comfortable for you to make your voice heard. Use your voice, use your rights, because that's what makes change. In the words of Margaret Mead, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has.
And if small groups of committed citizens can change the world, imagine all of you out there banding together as a kind of army to really make change that has been too long in coming.
And if anyone's trying to get in the way of you banding together, or if there are just stories you want us to hear, please visit us at aclu.org/walkout or text walkout to 82623.
And now we've gotten to the part of the webinar that we've most been looking forward to, which is not talking at you, but hearing what your questions are and responding to them. So Faz, you want to take it from here?
Sure, Ben and Vera. Thank you for that. And as you know, as a political director here at this organization, listening to lawyers lay out some of the parameters of what you can and can't do, I think my initial thought and reaction was to make sure that when you're talking about school policies, that you can change the policies through organized action, which many of the students are engaged in anyway. And so as you're thinking about engaging in activities to change the policies of the nation or your state, you can also be agitating ahead of time to change policies of your schools with regards to discipline. Ben and Vera, we got a ton of questions in. So let's just, we tried to wrap them together around common themes. So I'm just gonna shoot some at you and you guys can decide who goes first.
We're ready.
So Ashley Williams from Sicklerville, New Jersey. Appreciate the question. The question is, can students be refused from entering the school after a walkout? Can students be refused from entering the school after they walk out?
So in a lot of ways, that sounds like a suspension, and that's probably what the school should actually be calling it, but essentially the same things that we talked about before apply. A student should find out what are the general possibilities for discipline in their school and their school district, and so they would want to look at the policies for unexcused or unauthorized absences and also suspensions with regard to the walkout. But keeping you from going back into school basically is a suspension.
Sort of sounds like a silly idea to me as well. So if there are schools out there that are thinking about doing that, don't do that.
A second question from Ermaya Fanian. I'm sure I butchered it, from Midvale, Utah. Are we allowed to invite media and press to cover our walkouts? What if schools or districts say we cannot invite media or press? Are they allowed to restrict media coverage of our walkouts?
So I think the short answer to that is yes, they probably can. School is a learning environment. The school administrators generally have a lot of control over which people are allowed in and out who are not affiliated with the school. It wouldn't be the best learning environment if every time you walk down the hall you were worried about being filmed by reporters. That doesn't mean that reporters don't often come to schools when they're invited to do so. And certainly reporters are going to be able to cover these protests. My understanding is that you'll be walking out, not sitting in. And outside, the school certainly can't police where reporters can go just off of school property. I hope that many schools will understand that this is a historic moment and a historic movement, and will welcome having reporters there to record it. But schools do have some authority to make those decisions. And you should know that those news organizations usually have excellent lawyers. They'll be very good at asserting their own rights.
They know their rights too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a third question from Suhavi Salman in Springboro, Ohio. I live in an extremely conservative town, and students from my school are planning a pro-gun rally at the same time as the March 14th walkout. Do you have any advice on how to handle this?
Free speech can be messy sometimes.
Yeah, and this goes back to one of the things that we talked about in the beginning, which is that the First Amendment applies really to all speech, and it applies just as much to people who are pushing for gun rights as it does to people who are pushing for gun control. That said, it may be that these people are organizing both to push for their views and also to drown you out. And if that's the case, you should really work with your local authorities. That's the role of the police, to make sure that you are safe and to make sure that you are both heard in this situation.
That's right. If these rallies are both happening off campus, it's the job of the police to make sure that everybody can express their views in a way where they're safe and where they can be heard. If they're happening on school campus, I would hope that school administrators would try to find a way. I mean, what a great lesson in the First Amendment to have students expressing opposed views in a peaceful way nearby each other.
We've encountered this kind of situation a few times with people power and organizing with respect to views of those with whom we may not always agree. And you always face this issue as you're organizing about whether to organize at the same time and near the same place as those with whom you disagree. And that's a strategic decision. Sometimes it might be worthy and important for you to show up at the same time. Sometimes it might be a strategic decision to say they have their day and then we show up the day after, right? That was what happened with Trump. Trump had his inauguration, the Women's March shows up the next day, because we want to show them our power is even stronger and bigger. So I think those are just some of the strategic decisions I think you'd want to think about as you engage that as well. A fourth question from Matthew Hogan-Miller from Austin, Texas. How are my rights different at a private school than a public school?
Well, as Vera said before, at a private school, the First Amendment doesn't apply. Because the people who run the private school are not the government, and the Constitution only constrains or limits the authority of the government. It doesn't limit or constrain the authority of private actors. We would hope that
and if anything, private actors actually have their own First Amendment rights.
That's right. And so we would hope that many school administrators and principals in private schools would want to teach the same kinds of lessons in civic engagement, would want their students to learn about free expression and how to exercise their rights responsibly. But in that context, it will depend entirely on what the school's rules are. There's no outside rules being imposed by the Constitution.
Thank you. The fifth question from Marcia Blackburn from Binghamton, New York. It seems that your discussion tonight may be focused on high school students, but would you also address the possible implications for college students?
Well, I think we should talk about college students, and then maybe we should also talk about elementary students, right?
Yes.
Because it could differ at different ages. Why don't you start?
And they all have voices that should be heard. So if we're talking about college, the reason that schools in high school and middle school and elementary school can discipline you for not going to class is, like we said, because the law actually requires you to go to class. In college, that's not true. There might be some things like your grade depends in part on whether or not you're in class. And so, again, those things will likely apply in the same way, but your rights are much broader. The school isn't responsible for you during the day. You're an adult by the time you're in college, unless, you're a genius and you're there early, but assuming you're over 18. And again, a lot of what we're talking about here is about public colleges and public universities, and with regard to private ones, it goes back to what Ben was saying. We hope that private universities will be pushing for academic freedom and hearing voices in the same way that public universities are required to.
Going back to the school context, not college, remember that the test is whether the speech or expressive conduct will be disruptive of the school functioning. And that might actually be quite different for 12th graders than it would be for 6th graders. 12th graders who are closer to being adults, some of them are adults, are capable of hearing more provocative messages and are understood to be able to hear that without necessarily having it affect them in the same way that it might affect a child. And so schools might have a little bit more leeway in restricting speech rights for 11-year-olds than they would for 17-year-olds.
Another question from Mary Lou Barrett from Myersville, Maryland. We will be marching in the protest on March 24th in Washington. It would be helpful to know what our rights are and how we make our opinions known without risking doing something illegal.
So here we're talking about the outside of school context. And like we said, that's where your rights are by far the strongest. And so you can speak out just the way that anyone else can. I'm assuming that that march has a permit already. And so you might want to reach out to the organizers to know the full extent of that permit, where you're allowed to walk in the streets, where you need to be on the sidewalks. But also you can probably trust the crowd around you. If there's a permit, you really get to take over the entire space. If there's not a permit, so now I'm probably talking not about this particular march because it does have one, the police and other law enforcement can ask you to move to the side of a street or to be in a single file on a sidewalk, for example, so that you don't obstruct traffic or get in or create other safety concerns. But you really do get to join with other people outside and speak out, even if you don't have a permit.
Yeah, and I hope that everyone who's participating in this will have the chance sometime to go to Washington for one of those mass protests. It's an extraordinary experience, especially for young people, to be around thousands and thousands of other people who have come to the nation's capital to demand change, whatever the issue might be.
Speaking of Washington protests, we have one at the ACLU this Sunday at 1 p.m. You can plug it. If you're in the DC area, please join it. We're going to be fighting for dreamers. Donald Trump has been killing the dream. I mean, he said he was going to produce a solution. He has not yet. We will be raising our concerns that the president can act and has not, and he has a self-imposed deadline of March 5th to act. And so we're going to try to do everything we can and appreciate your attendance there. Another question from Caitlin Day in Portland, Oregon. Can campus police cite and or arrest you for using things like megaphones? In the park blocks at my school, a public park, campus police threatened to cite us for using a megaphone at a counter-protest in the fall. We had never been told not to use them, but they said it was school policy. What is the legality of this?
So this goes in part to a good way of thinking about your speech rights. Where you're physically standing determines a lot of what you can say and what you need and how you can say it. So here, I think, if the park is on school property, it's not quite a public park in the way that we talk about public parks in cities or towns. So like Ben was saying before about the news, the school has more control over what you can do in that space. If it's truly a public park, then amplified sound is still something that sometimes you're required to have a permit for. So again, it could depend. It's worth looking at the policy that applies to that particular park. And it is possible that you might need to get advance permission to use amplified sound.
And that does make a little bit of sense. If some students are protesting out of a school building and using a microphone, and other students are in class trying to learn or study, one clearly could disrupt the other. So it's going to matter a lot, as Vera said, where that speech is taking place and whether it is on school property or not.
Ben and Vera, I'm going to wrap up with some comments of my own, but I wanted to give you the opportunity, if there's anything that you wanted to say before you conclude, to do that now.
Yeah, again, we're here to try to answer some questions about what your rights are. It's up to you to decide how to exercise them. And I just want to say again how inspiring it's been for so many of us who spend our lives trying to change unjust policies to see the extraordinary impact that you've already had in such a short time.
Absolutely. We're taking your lead here, so thank you for giving us the opportunity.
with that, I just want to say a few remarks in closing. One, thank you for joining. Really appreciate this. We'll be trying to do as much as we can to help inform the movement, and appreciate you taking the time on a Thursday night to dial in. So there were 4 things that I said at the outset. I'm going to repeat them here. One is I want to make sure that we're going to share these materials with you. If you registered, you'll be receiving them via email. They'll also be posted at aclu.org, so you can go there. Number 2 is I want to make sure that you know about the issue that we raised, that if you encounter a legal issue or any other issue while you're going about your work, please make sure to contact us. aclu.org/walkout, you'll find a reporting form there, or you can text us at 82623 and we'll get back to you there. So please, if you encounter any issues, let us know. And number 3, as you're organizing your communities, please go to peoplepower.org, post your event there. Love to be plugged in with you and connect you with others in your community. And lastly, as I mentioned, there's a Summer Institute for high school students. The ACLU runs a week-long training for the next generation of social justice advocates. That can be accessed at aclu.org/institute. And with that, again, I want to thank you for all the work that you're doing, and I appreciate you taking the time to join us on a Thursday evening. Please stay in touch.
The more you know, the more liberated you are. Yeah!